Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Petrica Verdes. And Petrica is the translator for a Romanian mystic, I guess we could say, named Ilie Cioara. And in the past week, I've had the pleasure of reading portions of 4 of his books: The Silence of the Mind, I Am Boundlessness, The Wondrous Journey, and Life is Eternal Newness. And if I had had the luxury of preparing for this interview as thoroughly as I would have liked, I would have read all 4 books cover to cover, because they're very profound and very beautiful, and I think they're going to become better and better known in the collection of spiritual literature around the world. They'll become classics like Yogananda's book or Nisargadatta's book, because they're just so clear in their expression, not only of the absolute level of life, which Choara obviously was experiencing with crystal clarity, but of the whole relative span of life as well, which he explored experientially and understood intellectually, from the astral to the gross to the causal and whatever levels there may be in between. And I think a great deal of the credit for the clarity of these books belongs to Petrica, who did a beautiful job translating them. You must yourself have quite a deep and clear level of experience to have been able to do justice to the material, so congratulations on that.
Thanks. I have a few things to say about the translation.
Sure.
It's one of the easiest things I've ever done in my life. I didn't have to look for a certain word. I didn't have to think, oh, how should I say this, how should I say that. It just happened spontaneously. And I didn't set out to translate a book. I was just reading I was living in England, and by chance I had one of his books with me. So I was reading from this book to a friend, and I thought, wow, this sounds really good in English. So I translated one poem, and then what happened next was I felt this energy around me as I was reading the book, and I was working at the time, so I was waking up at 7 in the morning, and at 7 I was going to work. So what happened next was at 5 o'clock I started waking up at 5 o'clock spontaneously. It's like someone was pulling me by the collar and saying, translators. It was like this: 5 o'clock, waking up, piece of paper, and so I just took a poem, and I don't know, the words just came. I didn't have to choose them. That's why even now when I read the books, I read the books as if I haven't done the translation, as if someone else did it. I don't feel I can take credit for the translation.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean to say. The words just came, and sometimes I couldn't be fast enough to write them. Then afterwards I did the corrections, which because English is not my native language, so I'm insecure about some things, but 95% it stayed as it was. Maybe I would correct some grammar errors or something. So it's been a real pleasure for me, and like spiritual growth.
Yeah.
I've been living with his energy. I met him when he was alive. I met him once, but for a couple of years I was living with him in my space when I was translating all the books, and that everything came, even the order, because they're compilations. Ilie Cioara wrote 1,200 poems, or even more. He has about 16 books, and so the poems are followed by a prose version, a commentary, but it's not exactly a commentary, because it's exactly the same thing explained a bit more in depth in prose. But in the original language, the verses are in rhythm and rhyme. So everything, he wrote about 1,200 of them, and everything is almost perfect rhythm, like ta 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 ta, and with rhyme. So he has about 1,200 of them, and what he does is he keeps repeating more or less the same thing. So he's very repetitive, but there's a method in it. There's a reason for it, because in one of his writings he talks about Krishnamurti, and he says, with Jesus and Buddha, the followers of Jesus and Buddha, they didn't have anything written down by Jesus and Buddha. Everything was second-hand knowledge. The disciples wrote the New Testament, and with Krishnamurti he said everything's written down, but what he noticed with the disciples of Krishnamurti is that they gather, they have meetings, and they discuss what Krishnamurti said. So Ilie Cioara's method is to not give any nourishment to the mind, and the poems are an experience. They don't explain, but they try to take you beyond the mind. Mm-hmm. So if the reader reads them as a device for meditation, this helps the reader go beyond the mind, and it's repetitive on purpose, as I said.
And many great teachers use repetition because it's like a mantra. It sort of takes you to subtler and subtler levels with each repetition.
It's more like he just sat down, wrote a poem, wrote maybe the prose version, and then he forgot about it. The next day he sat down, he wrote another one, and he didn't remember the last one.
Yeah.
The whole point of the 1,200 poems is it's like a shredder for the mind. Mm-hmm. So it's like it makes mincemeat. If you are a true seeker and you use this device for meditation, perhaps if you read them and you don't meditate on these poems, then you might find them boring, or you might find them weird or strange. They're not always logical. But if someone has the patience to actually read them and experience them, it's like a shredder for the mind.
Yeah. Well, I found them very clear, and I felt as I was reading them, and I didn't even have time to read the prose version very much. I just read the poems. And usually I don't like to read poems because, I don't know, my mind wanders off. I don't follow them very well, but I found it was very easy to just settle in and read these and have each sort of each little paragraph.
I think the difference between ordinary poems and these poems, I would call them objective poetry. Something that, as I said, takes you into a space of meditation.
Right.
But it's something objective. It's not a subjective world. Like it takes you into reality. He calls them windows to infinity.
Yeah.
So each poem is a window to infinity, and whichever person reads them, it's the same. They will get the same experience. It's not a poet describing a subjective his subjective world.
Right. He's offering them as a technique for others to come into the same infinity that he had.
I've heard people
he was so familiar with.
I've heard people saying that they're not poetic enough. So it's not. I try to avoid the word poetry because it's not what you normally understand by poetry.
Yeah, they're verses, but they're very clear prose verses, really.
Like
and
sutras.
yeah, like reading the Gita or something. They could call that poetry, but it's really a narrative verse, and it's very clear what you're reading. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about yourself before we talk more about Ilie. How did you? I mean, you have a spiritual background. You grew up in Romania, I guess, but you've been a seeker or a spiritual aspirant for a couple of decades.
Yeah. Before I talk about myself, I have to say I have to clear something up. It's weird to talk about myself because it's like talking about someone else, or like talking about a past life.
Mm-hmm.
It's irrelevant. Like being here with you, talking to you right now. It's like I don't know what I'm talking about. If I talk about it's something very distant, like as if it happens to someone else. So I will give some details, if just in relation to Ilie Cioara. Maybe I'll let you know how I met him, or
yeah, just very brief,
so
just so people get a sense of who you are in a relative sense.
Okay. Well, I discovered meditation when I was 21 through some Osho books. So, and I was a student at the time, and I was doing the master's degree, and I had a lot of spare time on my hands. So, for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, I was there meditating from morning till evening. I was doing all kinds of meditations, and then in 2002 I met Ilie Cioara, and then in 2003 I started traveling, and I worked and lived in various Osho centers, some in Italy, some in Germany. There's another Osho center in the UK called Croydon Hall, one in Germany, Manusha. So I in the past about 10 years, I either meditated in the world, or for a few months I walked the walk, so to speak. I lived in these places where it's more about the energy in the place, and it's not about someone explaining things to you. It's more like you meditate, and then when your perceptions is enhanced, then you understand everything. Mm-hmm. It's like there's no teacher, or so in the past, I don't know, 13 years I've been meditating on my own from the moment I open my eyes in the morning till the moment I close my eyes in the evening. Awareness. So I've been doing this for many years.
Is it an actual practice you have to do, or is that just descriptive of your experience, that pure awareness is there throughout the day?
In the beginning, I've done a lot of practices, and I was infatuated with a lot of practices. And there came a point where the practice dropped off by itself. Mm-hmm. When the practice is exhausted, then I started practicing what Ilie is saying, just witnessing my thoughts, or just watching. I think the poems, the turning point for me was when I started translating the books. That was in 2006. That's when I started practice. Until then, I was doing a lot of techniques, and I've tried everything. But it's more of something that you're constantly aware of. Like whatever your meditation practice is, It's not something you do for an hour or 2 hours a day, because if you do a meditation for an hour a day, then for 23 hours a day you don't do meditation. So everything you've gained in that hour, it just goes down the drain.
So in other words, I could debate that, but
it's more like an inner thing. I mean, I was traveling. I met different schools and different people in my travels, and I've never traveled for the sake of traveling. I was always trying to find a new place where I could learn. But ultimately, it's an individual thing. It's your responsibility to meditate. Each person has, maybe they have a technique, or maybe no technique, or just witnessing. But it's about being aware 24 hours a day, not just for a few hours, just practicing something for a few hours, or going to a workshop and then coming home. Regardless if something comes to my mind, I used to say, regardless of all the places I've been in and places I've traveled, I feel as if I haven't gone anywhere. Does it make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an inner thing, and yeah, it's something you do alone.
Sort of
Even if you're with other people, it's in your aloneness you.
Kind of reminds me of the Beatles saying that there's nowhere you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. Now, so let's good. So we got a sense then of your orientation. Now let's switch it to talking about Ilie a little bit. He lived a rather dramatic life. He was pursued and persecuted by the communist regime in Romania, and he ended up hiding in an attic for several years that was so small he couldn't even sit up. He was lying horizontally.
Shall I tell you the story?
Yeah, do.
So he was just an ordinary guy. He had a wife, and he never thought about meditation. And I read in one of his books, he was a police. He was working in the police. He was a policeman.
Okay.
And in 1946, when the communists invaded Romania, everyone who opposed the regime was arrested. And all the intellectuals, writers, anyone who even could oppose the regime, they were sent to prison. Just kind of like Cambodia, but a bit less
extreme.
So Ilia was one of them, and he was. The police were searching for him, and so he hid in his parents' house, and they had an attic where he couldn't stand up. He had to lie down. It was a very small place, and he just had to lie down day and night, and nothing to do. He was just thinking. And one full moon night, he had a surprise. He had never meditated in his life, but one full moon night he was in the attic, and suddenly he discovered that he was in front of the house. Had left his body, and he found himself, he could float anywhere. And then he started speaking to dead people. He met, and then he started to explore that world. And there's a story where he goes into the next room where his mother and father are. He was just the first time he discovered this. So he goes into the next room, and he sees what they're doing. And then when his mother comes up, he tells her what she has been doing, and then they're surprised. Wow. So for 2.5 years, he stayed in the attic, and he explored this astral journeying. how should I call it?
Could he never come out at all? I mean, how did he go to the bathroom?
He did come out.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But mostly he had to stay there because the police could come any time or something.
No, I from what he says, he did come down to eat and stuff like that, but he had to be ready to go up.
Right.
He couldn't sleep, but he did come down occasionally.
So for 2.5 years, he was basically doing a lot of astral traveling.
Yeah. He was playing with it. And then...
and I just should add that the account of his astral traveling is quite fascinating. I mean, he really became proficient at exploring all the different realms and worlds and meeting all these different beings and, you know, got familiar with higher beings and lower beings and lost beings and trapped beings and all kinds of stuff. He really sort of acquired a thorough knowledge of that dimension.
Yes, but he also says that even though he was exploring that dimension, he had remained an ordinary man.
Oh yeah.
He didn't necessarily grow spiritually because he was doing astral journeying.
Right, but it was a phase he went through.
He describes himself, and he also says later on later on in the story when he was giving people messages from the deceased, he says that my ego had become quite big. Instead of growing in humbleness and in awareness, he developed a very subtle ego because he was special. He could astral. So he in his later writings, he doesn't give much meditation value to the fact of astral journeying. He described himself as, I was journeying astrally, but I was just an ordinary. My mentality had not changed. That's
right. But on the other hand, he does he does cover quite a few.
His realization is that there is no death. That was his message to people who he talked to during that period. There is no death. There's the astral world where people. So the physical body dies, and people continue to live in the astral world, and some people continue to take their mentality and live in the astral world the way they were living in the normal world. For instance, he describes a drunkard who dies and goes into the astral world. Because he doesn't have a body, he will want to experience drinking again. So he will follow a drunkard and feed off his emotions when he drinks. Or someone who's into sex, he will follow someone. And that's why some people who commit suicide, sometimes they hear voices before they commit suicide who tell them, do it. There's all kinds of lower entities or higher entities, and it's a world within the physical world, which cannot be measured with physical instruments because it's more subtle than the physical world.
Right.
But he describes this world in. There is one of his books is dedicated exclusively to his travels in the astral world. But because the people he meets, it's too. In a way, it's too restricted to the Romanian mentality. I didn't translate it yet. That one, because it's not something universal. It's very, very specific to the Romanian, the people he talks to, the people he meets, the conversations he has with these people. It's very local, so I didn't translate that because I didn't think that it would. And also, a publisher needed to be interested in publishing something like that. But
one little point that I found interesting in that phase of the story was he mentioned he met a man on the other in that realm who had been cremated, and he commented that if cremation is done too abruptly, it can produce tremendous suffering because the ties between the physical, etheric, and astral bodies are maintained after death.
He was referring to the ovens.
Right.
When people are cremated in ovens with temperature of 1,000 degrees.
Which they generally are. In the Indian tradition, it's customary to, of course, they've been cremating people for thousands of years, but it's customary to wait a certain period of time before you do it so that those ties can be severed and to do certain...
I think that's an intelligent thing to do.
Yeah, and they also even do certain ceremonies beforehand and everything, which helps the severing take place before the cremation. But obviously this is a very tangential point, but I think if we were to step back and kind of summarize the significance of this phase of his life, I would say that nothing happens by accident, and obviously he went through these experiences for a reason and learned certain things from them, and then moved on, after learning those things and realizing that this was by no means any sort of ultimate, solution to the mysteries of life.
He was, if I can say this, he was grateful to what happened.
Yeah.
And when I first read his story, I thought, wow, this man lived in very adverse circumstances. Mm-hmm. Communism. There were no spiritual books, nothing. And I thought, and then he went to prison for 6 years. He was caught, and then he was sent to prison in very dire circumstances.
Like hard labor.
Hard labor. He tells a story where he was because there's a channel, the Danube Channel, where the Danube goes into the Black Sea. Mm-hmm. So this Danube Channel was built by using the prisoners' work. So he tells these accounts where he had a partner he had to work with, and he had to dig into rock. Mm-hmm. He had to dig holes into rock, and if they didn't dig a certain amount, then the rations would be cut. Mm. And he says that at some point he weighed 42 kilograms.
Mm. Which is that's about 100 pounds, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During his imprisonment. So for 6 years he was in jail. Or there's another account of him in jail. There was a cell full of prisoners, like hundreds of prisoners. And there were so many prisoners that they could not sleep. They could not all sleep. They had to lie on one side and sleep for a few hours. And then a prisoner would give a signal, and then they would turn to the other side because they wouldn't fit in the cell. Mm. So it's hair-raising experiences. But what I want to say is he was grateful. He was grateful to the episode with the attic, but he was also grateful for the episode with the 6 years in prison. Because from his point of view, after that episode, when he returned to daily life, so he then was released, and then he went to Bucharest. After that, the only thing he was thinking about was liberation. So in a way, he considered that episode kind of like destroyed his ego, in a way. And I say this because I remember an episode in his book about the astral journeying, where he meets the president, the Romanian president. In the 70s, he journeys astrally, and he meets Gheorghe Doja. This was the Romanian president in 46.
So
the guy who put everyone to dig the channel, all the intellectual, he put them in prison. All the priests, they were put in prison, everyone. So he met, during these journeys, he met this president, the guy who did it all.
In the afterlife. The guy had died, right?
Yeah, the guy had died in 1956.
Okay.
And he met him, he went, I don't know, sometime in the 70s. Mm-hmm. He went in the astral and he met him. Mm-hmm. And what he did was he went to him and kissed his hand. And he said, the guy asked, why are you kissing my hand? And he said, I'm grateful to you because thanks to you, I've known God. So in a way, he saw these as devices, because without the ethic episode, he would not have discovered the journeying part.
Right.
And then without the time in prison, maybe he wouldn't have been so focused on liberation. Because he had not, after these hair-raising experiences, he didn't care about the world. He didn't care about women, or he had a job, and he went to the job, and then he came home. He was living alone for years, and he was just focused on that. But
yeah.
I think from his point of view, he's grateful for those experiences, from what I've read.
It's interesting. I mean, if we see the universe as one big evolution machine, and God as having the evolution of all of life's expressions as His purpose and primary function, then from that perspective, concentration camps and all the horrible things that happen in the world. People say, why? How could these things happen if God is compassionate? If God is, if it's all about evolution? But what you're saying is illustrate.
No, what I mean is, for him, it was a device. For others, maybe not.
Well, I don't know.
I'm not trying to justify concentration camps, but for him, it was the right device at the right time. Like God gives the ones with the greatest potential, they give them
greatest tests.
Tests. It's not about being comfortable. It's not about sitting at home and looking at the wall. These tests help you grow. Like any trial helps you grow. And in his case, I think he grew. But I wouldn't venture to say that the Nazi concentration camp, that I don't remember anyone getting enlightened from this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put it in a larger context and to make sense of such things, and to suggest that in the really big picture, perhaps everything that happens is in the long run somehow conducive to our growth. Even though I'm not condoning such things, I wouldn't condone the labor camps that Ilie Cioara had to be in, and probably most of the guys he was in there with didn't turn out so well as he did.
I agree. That's how he saw it as well. He used to say it's karma.
Right, so, right. At a certain point in his life, did he end up starting to read a lot of scriptures and spiritual literature, or did he never really?
He didn't have access to. I mean,
even later on.
It's difficult to say what kind of books he had access to, because in communist times there weren't no
scriptures around.
Yeah, like Krishnamurti, or they were banned. Like if they found out that you had them.
Yeah, I was just curious because so many of his writings.
I have just to answer your question. After he got out of prison, he met this dentist who had a spiritualist. They were doing. They had a medium, and they were talking to the dead. And he met him, and this guy had a library. So he said, each week I received a book from his library, and I devoured it. And he was reading, but it's difficult to say what he was reading because there were not many.
Okay, yeah. I was just curious because in reading his stuff, so much of it is so eloquent and reminiscent of various scriptures that it almost seems like he had read them, but maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. But there's a lot of profound knowledge in there.
It's very likely that he hadn't read, because it depends.
So after his whole, astral traveling phase, then he got into a Jesus prayer phase, right? Which is
it's the normal, Christianity is Orthodox Christianity is the normal thing in Romania. But also, when he met this dentist, and he met this circle who they had an astral guide. There was this monk who was dead, and he was guiding them through a medium. So then he arrived, and he joined the circle, and they followed the teachings of this monk. And the monk was Christian, so the teachings were Christian, and even Ilie Cioara was following a Christian path. And he started practicing the mantra mentioned in the Russian Pilgrim book.
Right. I've read that. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Yeah.
He started doing that for many years, and he went to this spiritual circle. As I said, in communist times, if they were caught, they would have been arrested. So there's not many possibilities to get books, but he started on this path mainly because the country is Christian, and also the guide, the astral guide who was guiding them, because he didn't know anything about non-duality or stuff like. He was a Christian for many years, and he was doing this mantra.
As I understand it, he did it very diligently, day and night. You know, even while he was working and stuff, this was going on in his mind.
Yeah, for 20 years or 15.
20 years, yeah. So he went through, for a period of 15 or 20 years, he was in a phase of intense practice of the Jesus prayer. And then? And then
at one point he realized that, I don't know, he experienced the block, and he realized that the mantra did not really give him the liberation he was searching for. Mm-hmm. So he was really depressed for a few days. For a couple of days, he thought, I've been doing this mantra for 20 years and nothing's happened. And he describes it as all the changes experienced were just a mask. Mm-hmm. So he experienced a period of crisis with this, and then out of this crisis he got this intuitive impulse to drop the mantra. Mm-hmm. and he started to just watch everything. He was watching whatever was around him. He was watching his thoughts, and he noticed that when he was watching his thoughts, the thoughts started to disappear, and there were pauses in between thoughts. And then he tells this story that he was just, when after work he came home and he was just listening to the noises in the street, and on a Sunday when there were no noises, he was listening to the silence. So he's just listening, and that's why I say it's something he felt intuitively. He didn't read about it. I think I don't know, his expression is, in a way, he was very isolated. So the way he expresses, I mean, he touches on the same points that you might have read in other mystics, but I think he discovered them by himself, because after dropping the mantra, and then a few years he was just trying to be silent, just watching, just listening to all the noises without making any mental comments. When he was 55, when he woke up, he noticed that something was different. He felt like someone who had been blind from birth, who had just regained his sight following a surgery.
So just one morning, he happened to wake up from sleep, and all of a sudden everything was different.
In the morning, he describes this. In the morning at 5 or 6 o'clock, before going to work, he wakes up and he notices that his mind is completely silent, mm-hmm. and he notices that he's different. without searching for this. He hadn't read about enlightenment, and he was going to church up to the last week before he experienced this. He was regularly going to church, and he tells his story that after he experienced, I don't know, I can't describe it for him. So he had this. He said, "I didn't search for it. It just came, but I had to be prepared for it. The years of mantra practice prepared me for the silence, and the years of silence prepared me for that to happen. Just out of the blue in the morning, when he woke up, when he opened his eyes, it was like something happened."
Yeah, I would say that, all these things he went through, and in a broader sense, all the things everybody goes through, are just phases of preparation. And sometimes people have a final awakening, and then they say, "Oh, you don't need to do all that stuff, just awaken."
Yeah.
But they kind of forget what they went through, and that actually those things were instrumental in bringing him to that point.
It's the same with Papaji. He did 20 years he was doing Ram, and I actually read that he was doing Ram with the breath, and he was counting. He was doing, 6,000 times a day, and the mind, he thought, okay, I have to do it more. So if I breathe 12,000 times a day, it's like quantitative thing. He was, okay, I'll breathe 12, in this way I'll do it more. But then after he awakened, he said, no practice, just wait. But another thing I want to say, I'm going off track a little bit. No, about Papaji. When he talks to his disciples, he says, just realize that you're free. If you're with the true guru, just realize that you're free. And just like I did with Ramana. But I remember that he met Ramana first time and he wasn't impressed. And then he did the mantra for 20 years. And then the second time he met him, he was ready. So
yeah.
I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, but a lot of times the intoxication of realization causes people to forget or to not connect the things they have been doing which led up to that realization. They somehow just begin speaking and living from the state of experience that they're in.
Maybe they have a different perception, and they realize that there's no need for a teacher, that there's a shorter way. But maybe the people are not ready to listen to this message.
Yeah, maybe so.
I don't know.
It's interesting. Anyway, so he woke up, and I have a sentence I wrote down here which said, "When the mind is silent, a new mind appears, pure consciousness." So there's a lot of emphasis in his book on the silencing of the mind, or on the mind being silent, and that if the mind is sufficiently silent, then pure consciousness shines forth. It's reflected clearly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like in traditions, the analogy is used of water. If you have a lake that has a lot of waves and ripples, then the sun doesn't reflect very clearly. But if the water becomes very still, then you get a very clear, bright reflection of the sun. You need sunglasses even to look at it.
But the silence of the mind does not necessarily mean the silence of the mouth. Because
no, it doesn't.
I've met him, and he was very talkative. But this just means your mind is silent, and words come out of your mouth without thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is one thing I like about him, is his interdimensionality. In other words, he doesn't have this all or nothing approach where you would have to be silent on all levels. He's fully comfortable with his very integrated approach, where you could be a very talkative, dynamic, active person, perhaps, if that's your nature, and yet there's this silent foundation of that is your inner experience.
Yeah, and he's very in favor of being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
and he says something like each challenge we face every day is an opportunity to awaken.
And so what practical advice did he give, or did you extract from all of this in terms of stuff that people could actually take to heart and follow and do or whatever? Like, for instance, if the silencing of the mind is a valuable thing, then how does one silence the mind?
You cannot try to silence the mind, because that's the mind trying to silence the mind. I think he explains it best in his books, better than I could try. I've studied them and I've practiced them, and but what I could say is you cannot silence the mind. So you have to realize that the goal, not the goal, because you cannot start with the goal, but the destination is the silent mind, but you cannot force it to be silent.
Right.
There's a poem where he says, "Do not try to be silent. Do not try to be simple." So his main message, I don't know to.
Well, here's let me help you. I mean, if it seems that trying could very well be counterproductive.
Do not indulge in his main message. Do not indulge in overthinking, in trying to understand it with your mind. Do not try to gather knowledge, because it's useless. And just it's a very simple practice of witnessing, just watching whatever happens, just watching the emotions, watching the thoughts, watching what's around you.
I was going to say, you probably are more familiar with his teaching than just about anybody, because you translated his books. So, what have you personally extracted from all of that, and what impact, in terms of some kind of practical application, and what impact has it had on your life?
As I said, it's a very simple practice, just watching the thoughts, watching the emotions, just a watchfulness, he calls it all-encompassing attention, just spontaneous attention without any purpose, and you just watch. You watch the thoughts, you watch the emotions, you watch what's around you, and it's something you have to do. You have to practice. You have to do, and you cannot force the mind to be silent. But silence happens if you watch anything you watch calms down. If you watch the mind starts to calm down. If you're angry, and instead of saying, "Oh, I'm angry with him," so you put your anger outside. You
tune into your
make
own.
Someone responsible for your anger and say, "I'm angry with him," and then you focus your anger out. Instead of doing that, if you simply watch the anger, emotions change. So anger cannot. It's like a wheel. One moment you're angry, then you're sad. So anger cannot exist without your involvement in it. So the moment you watch, everything calms down. So it's witnessing. It's something that unfolds through practice. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, when I first started practicing it, it was one way. Then, after a few months, it's just something that unfolds, and it cannot be necessarily explained. Each person needs to explore it by himself through practice. And finally, what happens is that you start by either watching the thoughts or just watching what's around you. But finally, this attention includes everything. It's called all-encompassing attention. So you're just attentive to whatever's happening in you and out. It becomes one movement.
When you first started doing it, or perhaps even now to some extent, did you find it divisive? In other words, if you were trying to, let's say, balance your checkbook, and you're focusing on that, and then at the same time you have to be watching your thoughts, wouldn't that sort of be a distraction?
As I said, each time it's different, but it does not have. Just let me remember, because I'm doing. Now it's not divisive. Mm-hmm. I can do anything, and there's an awareness there. Mm-hmm. But I have to remember how it was in the beginning. As I said, it changes as you practice. You go deeper.
Perhaps in the beginning you found
but
that
it's not meant to be divisive. You can watch what you're doing. For instance, if you write a check, you watch your mind, and then you just watch your hand writing the check. You are fully in what you're doing, because usually you're not attentive to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But it's not, as I said, it's something that needs to be explored, and through practice it deepens, and it becomes something it opens up.
Yeah.
Even in the beginning stage, it's not like I'm doing a check and then I'm watching myself, and that distracts me from writing a check. It's more like I can write a check, or I can watch myself write a check, but I'm still there writing the check. It's just that people in the beginning, from my experience, you forget. So you get involved. You write the check, and then you forget to watch. But then you remember again, okay, I watch myself write the check. And then you forget again, and then you remember again. So that was my experience in the beginning. But it changes, like through practice it changes. At some point you're there, there's very few thoughts in your head, and you just write a check.
So in the beginning at least,
beginning you can't even, it's possible that you do it with your mind, because the mind tries to watch, but without this stage you won't go deeper. Okay. So in the beginning it's possible that the mind is trying to watch, but slowly it needs to be relaxed, with patient. Mm-hmm. So a relaxed, patient watchfulness, without following any goals. You just watch. All whatever right. appears, you watch. It's like a laser. He called like a laser.
Yeah.
So,
and so
you watch.
And
you watch.
Right.
So this watchfulness slowly starts to open up, and it becomes all-inclusive. It's not like a concentration where, okay, I focus on the check, I don't see anything else, I don't hear anything else, and just write a check. Mm-hmm. Watchfulness begins by, or witnessing begins by, first you can watch the body. You watch your physical body, because the physical body is always in the now. Or you watch the mind. You watch something, but with practice, this witnessing unfolds, and it becomes all-inclusive. So it includes the mind, it includes the emotions, it includes the physical body, it includes whatever is around you. If you watch a beautiful sunset, or if you watch a beautiful woman, or whatever it is.
So if you had to go in for...
It unfolds. But in the beginning it can be that you watch the thoughts and you feel like you're watching something.
Got it. So if you had to go in for brain surgery, would you want to have a surgeon who was just beginning the practice of watching his thoughts, or would you rather have a surgeon who wasn't doing that because you wouldn't want him, because perhaps the guy that was just starting this practice would be a little bit divided and distracted by trying to do it?
I don't know how to answer this question, because the guy who's not watching, maybe he's doing it automatically, but maybe he's not paying attention. So he's maybe thinking of something else, so he might make a mistake because he's not there. Uh-huh. And someone who starts to watch, maybe he's more attentive.
Okay. So the reason I asked that question is...
The fact that he's not watching, it's not guaranteed that he's paying attention.
Right. So in other words, this watching process that you're talking about isn't necessarily, even from the beginning, going to cause any kind of reduction in one's efficiency. In fact, it may even enhance it.
Yeah, because the less you think, the more the less mind stuff, the less confusion there is. So just do it. You pick up something, you put it there. You don't have to think. Most activities in our life, you don't have to think about it. You can do it. You can do them without thinking. You can go to the supermarket, buy what you need. I don't know how to say it, but there's no need for thinking.
So it's interesting. I've always thought of witnessing as more of a condition than a practice, but
because it's not concentration.
Right. It's just a gentle attention.
Beginning, maybe in the beginning, but it's not supposed to be like that. So if you do something, then watch what you're doing, because watchfulness it's something that grows, but it's not necessarily connected to an object. You can watch the thoughts. You can watch but you can also watch what you're doing. So, like brain surgery, you can watch yourself. You can watch the thoughts, or you can simply, okay, I'm opening the skull. I'm doing this brain surgery, so I'm watching what I'm doing attentively. So this watchfulness in the beginning, it's like a small bud, but with practice it starts to unfold, and then it includes everything. So maybe in the beginning, if someone misunderstands witnessing, maybe in the beginning, but it's the opposite of concentration. It's not concentration. But maybe in the beginning, but it shouldn't decrease your attention. It should increase your attention.
Okay.
Even in the you have to be attentive. And Ilie Cioara, he was living in the busiest city in Romania. He was in the capital. So everything, stuff being thrown at you every day. And he said, each new thing that appears makes me be more attentive.
Yeah. Well, a few minutes ago you were talking about anger as an example, and you were saying, ordinarily a person says, I'm angry at him, and the whole focus is on him. And with this watching practice, it's more like one is tuning into one's own feeling, one's own inner experience of anger. And maybe with the phrase self-referral.
You just say, I feel angry.
Yeah.
No, I'm angry at him. There's a feeling in me that's called anger. Go on, I don't want to interrupt you.
So you cultivate a condition of self-referral rather than object referral.
It's not repression.
Right.
So it's a middle path between repression and expression. You might want to live it, for instance. If you feel angry with someone, you go into a room and you express it with your body, but you don't dwell on it. You don't linger on the thought that it's his fault, and then you're angry at that person for 3 days. And you wake up in the night and you think, I'm so angry at that guy because he did that to me. So witnessing, it's neither repression nor expression. You don't repress it. I don't know how to explain it, but if you watch it, it comes down. I don't know how to explain it to the
I understand. You're explaining it. What happens in your experience when you go to sleep at night? And did Ilie ever talk about what his experience was during sleep? That you can recall?
From my experience, for now, I go to sleep, I fall asleep. I have less dreams, but the ultimate flowering of meditation is when, even during deep sleep, you are awake.
Right.
You are aware of what's happening, and you feel like your body is falling asleep, but part of you stays awake. But I haven't experienced that.
Okay. I would suggest that you're not necessarily aware of what's happening because your senses are shut down, but pure awareness remains, without any object during sleep. And that's a level of witnessing that eventually gets established.
You witness 24 hours a day. You witness from the moment you wake up slowly, slowly, with the passing of the years, the practice deepens.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the flowering of this practice is when witnessing continues even during deep sleep.
Right.
I suppose that's enlightened. So enlightened people, they don't lose. I mean, I don't know how to describe it because it's not my experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in a way it's hearsay, but it's kind of a part of you stays awake. You don't remain awake. You feel like your body falls asleep, and maybe some I've had this experience, and maybe some of the viewers have had this experience where you feel like you meditate and you feel like the body is falling asleep, the eyes are closing, and you feel like part of you is falling asleep, and then part of you is awake.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't had experiences where all night I remain awake. That's
yeah.
my experience. Yeah.
Well, it's not that part of your individuality remains awake. It's that your universal pure consciousness is always awake. What would happen to the universe if that slept?
Yeah.
The whole, that's the foundation of the whole, of everything. And so, it just is a matter of having enough conscious appreciation of that, such that there's one's awareness of that is, or one's being in that as that is a continuum that is like the the waves of waking, dreaming, sleeping keep undulating, but that underlying silence of a deeper aspect of the ocean remains awake.
I agree. You describe it perfectly.
Yeah. And that's why the whole topic of witnessing I find interesting, because on the one hand, witnessing, as you've described it, can be a practice where you're just
in the beginning it's a practice.
In the beginning, but eventually it's a state.
Yeah.
It's a condition.
Yeah. And the more you do it, the more spontaneous, effortless it becomes.
Yeah, to the point where, as we've been saying, it could be that witnessing persists throughout deep sleep. Now, obviously, if that's what's going on, it couldn't be a practice then, because how can you practice anything when you're asleep? It's just you're asleep,
Witnessing starts as a practice only because we have a very active mind.
Right.
So it starts as the practice, but ultimately the practice starts to disappear. The effort starts to disappear, and then you're just it's called just being. You just are.
Right.
But you also feel like the limits disappear.
You could almost say that the purpose or any really effective practice is actually going to put itself out of business. It's going to exterminate itself. It's going to come to a culmination where the practice itself is transcended.
Yeah. But it's kind of like swimming.
Mm-hmm.
How the way you learn swimming. Meditation is kind of like swimming. It's something that you cannot explain. You cannot explain to someone how to swim. But what you can do is you can make him practice these movements and move his hands and his feet, and then throw him in the water, and then he moves his hands and his feet, and at one point he gets it, and he knows how to stay afloat, and then he doesn't need to make such a big effort to stay afloat. But with witnessing, it's the same thing. In the beginning, it's a practice. It needs to be a very relaxed and disinterested practice.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a practice because the mind is very active. So it's the only way to... It's because of the mind that it's like that. But slowly, you relax. It becomes something that's very spontaneous. So after years of practice, then it's no longer a practice. It's just a state of being. You just realize, oh, there was a thought. Or you just stay wherever you are. For instance, I'm talking to you. I'm looking outside the window, and I just see everything around me. Where can I be? I can only be here. And then I notice, oops, there's a thought. But it's not as it's not an effort the way it used to be in the beginning. So like you say, the practice needs to destroy itself.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have to start with the ABC to get to the X, Y, Z.
Right.
You have to
Exactly.
practice it. You have to practice it for it to destroy itself. Otherwise, you just remain in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't practice anything, then you just remain in the mind. So, in the beginning, in truth, there is no need for a practice. But in the beginning, because the mind is so active, there is a need to practice.
Yeah.
But as the mind becomes more silent, then it's not a practice. It's like you say, it's just being. It's just who you are, or whatever you want to call it. It's just who you are.
Well, in truth, we're all already enlightened, but that's just a conceptual notion for most people, and it doesn't do you any good to just entertain that as a truth. There needs to be.
Yeah, it can be an excuse. You're already enlightened, so then
don't bother doing
need
anything.
to do anything.
Yeah, it's an excuse for laziness.
Yeah, and people who do something, then they look stupid because you're already enlightened. So why do you practice?
Why are you doing anything? Yeah.
I disagree completely. I mean, when someone I don't know, a true enlightened person says you're already enlightened, it is not necessarily true that the person who repeats that understands what the person meant, because maybe he's saying, maybe the enlightened person says you're already enlightened. Maybe he says it to encourage you, but then the mind will take anything and use it for its own ends. Like, oh, I'm already enlightened. Okay, I can just roll over and put my head on the pillow and
party on.
Already enlightened.
Did Ilie talk much about the body? I was reading one portion where he was saying how his heart had been damaged by all the hard labor, and he did a healing thing where the spiritual energy was able to come in and heal his heart, and then he felt much better. Does he talk much about the body as a vehicle to enlightenment, and as a chariot that takes you to the goal, and that you need to culture that chariot and keep the wheels greased and everything to reach the goal?
He doesn't talk much about it, but I think it goes without saying. Mm-hmm. In his words, it goes without saying that you have to respect the body. And well, I wanted to tell you about my meeting with him.
Okay, yes, please.
Okay. Moment.
Do you get emotional when you think of it?
No, I just had a blank moment because
okay.
I discovered one of his books. It was 2002, and this crazy thought came to my mind. I wrote to his publisher and I said, well, where can I find this? I thought he was already dead, because you only find out about people like this when they're already gone. So I asked him. I asked his publisher, and then his publisher sent me a letter with his phone number. So I called him and I said, I want to come and see. The publisher said he's open to anyone who wants to visit him. So I called him and I said, okay, I want to visit. It was about 8-hour journey on a train. And he said, okay, come tomorrow. So I got on the first train, and I got there the next morning. And regarding what you said about his heart, when I met him, he was 86 years old. But I didn't know that, and I thought he was about 60. So he was 86, and I was 22 or 23. And I felt he was more alive than I was. I felt like the way he moved, he was very, very much alive. And I looked into his eyes because I wanted to see his eyes, because I'd seen, the eyes of the enlightened in many photos, like photos of Papaji or Ramana or Osho, so I wanted to see his eyes. So I rang the door, and then I saw, the same eyes I had seen in photos, but it was different because they were live. I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't just
It was an experience. It was like, and the biggest lesson I got from it was like, it is possible for me to, because I had read it. I read, okay, there's a thing called Enlightenment, stuff like that. But when I saw him, I was like, oh yeah, it's real. It's real. It's possible for me too. And so that's what I want to say. He talks about his heart problem and his main message. There's another poem, Mind Destroys the Body. His main message is, if the mind is silent, then the body repairs itself. Mm-hmm. And if the mind is very active, the mind destroys the body. Mm-hmm. So what he did was just, in the poem he described, just sitting in silence and just surrendering. And just saying, okay, I surrender, and just being silent. And somehow the heart regenerated. He wrote a lot of books before he died. He wrote about 5 books in the last 2 or 3 years. He wrote a lot.
Are you going to translate them?
So what's been published so far is they're all compilations of what I thought were the best stuff. And I also needed to convince the publisher to publish it. So I chose the best poems so it's interesting in some way to the reader. I couldn't publish them the way they were originally published, because it would have been a boring book from the point of view of the publisher. Mm. So it's just, for now, it's the 4 compilations, and I have 2 more that I've translated. Mm-hmm. Mainly the poem, prose parts, other than the Astral. So there will be 6 books in total. But if someone is interested in publishing them, I will translate more. But for now, I wanted to not be so scary for an ordinary reader.
So you were saying that there might be something scary for the reader in some of these unpublished books, and you
not
wanted
scary,
to,
but
might off-putting in some way?
The problem is the poems were written in rhythm and rhyme. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very difficult to write something meaningful in rhythm and rhyme. So when you translate them, it's not so interesting, but they're very repetitive. Mm. It's not scary, just repetitive. And
you wanted them to be interesting, engaging. Yeah,
I made these 4 books in a way that's engaging. So maybe because it's all a business. Mm-hmm. Publishing. So if the books sell, then more people become interested in them. If the books don't sell, then nobody knows about them. Right. So on.
And the publisher doesn't want to do any more.
I tried about 100 publishers before I found this publisher. So it's more like doing a best-of album. Yeah. And putting out a best-of album, and then if people are really interested in it, then I can translate some more. That's the idea.
This point you brought up a few minutes ago about the mind either destroying or healing the body, depending upon whether it's active or silent.
He says 99% of diseases are created by the mind. Mm-hmm. So the body has a huge potential of regenerating itself and healing itself. But it does not have enough energy to do that, because most of the energy goes into the mind. Right.
And also it's worth mentioning that the mind and body are interrelated. So if the mind is all agitated, the body's going to be all agitated, and vice versa. So if you can quiet either one of them, they'll both quiet down together. And then when the body is quiet, it naturally heals itself, just as it does during sleep, when we get rid of all the fatigue and the stress of the day.
Also, when the mind is silent, the body fills up with energy. So
exactly.
It has enough energy. Sometimes you feel like when you're depressed, then you feel drained. Mm-hmm. So that's because the body is drained of energy, because too much energy is going into the mind. Right.
Feel free to interject any ideas that we're not talking about, but I had another one on my list here. When I was reading his book, he had a whole chapter or section on the evolution of consciousness, and he took the sort of traditional, I guess maybe it's a Vedic view, that we evolve over millions of years through all sorts of species. We might start out, our soul essence or whatever he called it, might start out as a rock, you know, and then become a plant eventually, and then animals, we go through various animal species, and eventually reach the human level, where enlightenment becomes possible.
From how I understand it, he wrote that from his own experience. Everything he wrote, he said, it's from my experience. I didn't read it in a book.
I was going to ask you that,
maybe
actually.
He rediscovers the wheel. Maybe it's stuff that other mystics have said. But for him, it's simply communicating his experience.
He cognized it.
Yeah, so if he writes something from reading all his books, I understand. Even if you've read it in some other book, he writes it because he's experienced it.
Yeah,
so
I got that sense in reading him. And I respected him all the more for bringing out ideas like that, because a lot of times spiritual teachers and writers these days are a little bit simplistic, in my opinion, and they wouldn't entertain such a notion that there is some entity or some core of our being which could evolve over long spans of time to higher and higher expressions. But to me, that makes perfect sense. I don't know.
he even says that the rock feels. So if you throw a rock, or if it's hot, the rock will suffer, or if it's very cold, he says that if you watch the rock, and the normal state of perception of a human being is in a normal state of perception we're unable to feel the rock, what the rock feels. But he says that he feels the consciousness in the rock, and the rock suffers, and it's a more basic life form, but it's, I don't know, that's what it's,
everything is alive.
Everything is alive, even a rock. And we have been rocks once.
Yeah, sometimes I still think I'm one. And you know, they've done experiments on plants where they'll have plants hooked up to some sort of electrodes, and then maybe they'll bring a flame near it or something that would threaten the plant. And even though it's not actually harming it yet, the plant reacts to that danger. They can tell.
And they communicate.
Right. There's all sorts.
If you cut a tree, then in some other part of the forest, other trees will feel fear.
Yeah.
Because they communicate. Another thing I wanted to say about how he started writing these poems. In 1971, when he had the experience in the morning where he woke up and he says he was no writer. He wasn't a writer by trade, or he never wrote anything in his life. And a few days after that thing happened, that experience, he felt this impulse to write. And the reason I mention it is because he felt this impulse to write poems. So he wrote about 300 poems in a year, from 71 till 72. And then he didn't write anything for 16 years. He just felt he had to, something, and he said, I'm not a poet, but I had to be a poet. I had to become a poet because I wanted to express it. But he was not attached to, he didn't publish his what he wrote. He had to hide it in a friend's apartment because he was an ex-political convict. The secret services, maybe they searched his house when he wasn't at home, so he had to hide it with a friend. But what I'm trying to say is, so in 71 he wrote about 300 poems, and then he stopped. For 16 years he didn't write anything. And then in 1988, I don't know how, but he felt he had to write again. And that somehow he felt that in 1989 the fall of communism would come. So then he started writing again, I don't know, another 600 poems. But he didn't set out, what I'm trying to say is, he didn't set out to write. He didn't set out to become a teacher. He just wrote 300 poems and then said, I'm free.
Yeah.
And then after 16 years, then another impulse. Okay, I have to write again. I don't know why, but I will do it.
Yeah. Just like your impulse to translate, it just kind of came up. Did he ever talk about? I mean, he talked a lot about the developments in his life prior to his enlightenment. You know, hiding in the attic and the astral travel and the Jesus prayer and all that stuff. After his enlightenment, that morning when he woke up, both literally and spiritually, did he ever talk about what sort of progress or integration or development he underwent in the weeks and months and years after that time?
He talks about the first few hours.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he was so dumbfounded by the experience that he couldn't. He said he couldn't. It took him a few hours to realize what had happened. He was just stunned. He talks about that it took him a few hours to realize what's happened. It was just like a state of being just stunned. But he doesn't talk much about an integration of the experience.
Okay, or an evolution.
It just happened.
I mean, did he say that his experience?
He said like this. He said, "The shell of the ego is broken.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. There's no integration. The shell has broken, and enlightenment happened. But I don't remember him mentioning the need for integration."
Okay. I'm just curious because I have sort of the attitude, and I may be wrong, that there's no end to it. You know, in fact, there's a Saint Teresa quote where she says even God himself is still on the journey. That, you know, that no matter how enlightened one may be, there's still further unfoldment or refinement or something. So, and I may be wrong, as I said, but I'm just curious if you ever commented on that.
I agree with you. I didn't mean that it stopped there.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering.
All I meant was, he said the shell of the ego broke, and I can go into the infinite dimension whenever I want to, or something like this. Mm-hmm. But he did not insist on. And what you just said, I think it's the case with him. It's an ongoing experience. It never stops.
Okay.
But he doesn't insist upon it much, because when he writes, he's interested in the person who reads. So he's interested in showing the way. He's not interested in describing and writing treatises or philosophical dissertation on what happens after you become enlightened. He's interested in sharing with people how to
get enlightened. Yeah.
To get there. When he writes, he's not concerned about himself. He's more concerned about, okay, if you want to get there, this is how you can do it. So what I'm saying is he doesn't mention it much. I don't remember reading much where he actually describes what happens after enlightenment, if it's an integration or not.
Well, I agree with you that, you know, for most people it's not perhaps relevant because they haven't reached that stage yet. But I think it's becoming more and more.
You will know.
Yeah, but it's actually becoming more relevant because more and more people are reaching it. And in fact, some people like Adyashanti actually write whole books about what to do, or how it's dealing with issues that arise after awakening. You know. Yeah. And it's an interesting field to explore.
I remember that poem. There's two poems about the seven bodies where he tells.
Yeah. Talk about that for a minute.
There's these poems where he talks about the seven bodies, and the fifth is the body of enlightenment. Mm-hmm. So when you experience enlightenment, there's a fifth, and then he talks about the pitfalls of what happens in the fifth. That you can
get stuck.
It's like you can get stuck. It's like a paradise. You're happy, so you get stuck there. And then there's the sixth, which is the cosmic, and then there's the seventh, the nirvana, which is pure light. Maybe these terms are familiar from other teachers. But he's not overly concerned with what happens. He does mention this with the seven bodies, but the focus is to take you by the hand, take you there, and then when you experience it, you will know. But he doesn't he doesn't mention much.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's interesting.
Another thing I wanted to say about my meeting with him. I don't know if you've interviewed many people. I don't know if this has come up, but my experience meeting him, it was I was in his apartment and I couldn't think. It was just blank.
Mm-hmm.
And then I looked into his eyes. I saw this thing with the eyes, and we sat down. And then he said, "Do you have anything to ask?" And I said, "No." And no, I'm not interested in theory. I said something. I'm not interested in theory. And then I just sat there, and then I felt like he came out of his body, and it was like a shower of energy. And then I started laughing. I felt happy. I don't know. I don't know if I describe it the way it happened, but my feeling was like he got out of his body and he entered mind, and there was this explosion of happiness. But what I wanted to say is, when I met him, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear.
Fear of him or of what?
I don't know. It's just there's a strong energy, but I felt fear. I mean, maybe the eye felt fear,
I see.
but it was just like this irrational fear, and there was a feeling of, wow, wonderful energy, great, but there was also a lot of panic.
What do you make of that? How do you interpret that?
My mind was afraid.
Because it was being exterminated or something?
It was just, I don't know, I think this is how I understand why people kill Jesus. But when he's dead, then they worship him. But when he's alive, they just want him.
Yeah.
They want him to go away, because I felt in his apartment. I felt a strong energy. He said, "Do you want me to ask?" He said, "Do you want to ask something?" He said it over. Ask me something. And I said, "I can't think everything." And he said, "That's no problem. Go home, write it down, and then come back." He said, other people have told me the same thing, that when they're here, they can't think. But
Right.
it's like this powerful energy, like a vortex, and the mind is afraid. The part of you is afraid. The ego, I don't know how should I call it.
No, I think I know. I definitely know what you mean.
So
Yeah.
I was afraid also. I was happy to be there, but there was, I don't know, there was a fear. And I couldn't think. I just went blank. I said, "Ask me something, anything."
I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, actually, if they've ever met a great being like that. It just the very presence, drags you into the transcendent, and then all your normal faculties don't function as they are accustomed to functioning. And and everybody talks about fear as being the final frontier, so to speak, the final gatekeeper between us and wholeness or unity, because it's something which it's characteristic of duality. As long as there's duality, there can be danger and threat and fear and so on. And when duality starts to dismantle, as it would in his presence,
in this case, there was no
fear
reason.
rises. No reason. It's not a rational
This
thing.
nice old man.
Yeah.
Looks about 60. What can he do? But I suppose the mind is afraid. When there's silence, then the mind goes, "Oh."
Yeah, because your mind is sort of it's facing its annihilation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's why the fear comes up.
Yeah.
Nice. So how long was that relationship? Did you just see him for a couple of days?
And then I left. The next year I left for Italy, and at that time I wasn't ready for his message, and then the mind also started to rationalize stuff, and then I don't know. I went to Italy the next year, and the next year I came back and I called him, and then he was gone.
Well, I think
But
it
I
was.
wasn't ready for. I was very much infatuated with techniques, and I wanted to experience this technique, and I had, my mind was going in another in another direction. In a way, I missed him. I didn't understand him when I met him. I understood him later.
Yeah.
And there was this fear also, which there's fear, and then the mind rationalizes, and then he finds, okay, I need to go there. He sounds too Christian for me.
Were many
And
people
all
coming
kinds
to
of
see him? I
stupid
mean,
things.
did he have like little
I was put
satsangs
off
or
that-
anything?
Sorry?
I say, were many people coming to see him, or was it kind of rare? Did he have a little gathering that would talk to him?
I don't know if I think he had a few friends, but he didn't condone satsang.
Mm.
He was very much saying, you have to do the work, you have to get there, you have to do witnessing, and he didn't condone people just sitting there. He didn't like. He was against the guru master,
Yeah.
guru disciple thing. So he had no conditioning, no Indian conditioning. Just discovered this. So it was just me. But from what I know, over the years, he received many visitors, including just curious people. He was open to talking to anyone. And he just opened the door, and he didn't know who I was, he didn't know my name, and he did that with everyone, and he didn't charge anything, he was just sharing. But I don't think many people were aware of him when he was alive, in Romania at least.
Well, it's ironic, but you only met him a couple of times, and you felt like you weren't ready to really appreciate him, and you went on and did other things. But as it all turned out, he's had a huge impact on your life, and you've had a huge impact in terms of popularizing him, but making him better known to the world.
I feel him right now. He's here.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
As we talk about him, he's here. I've spent the last few years in his presence, so translating was like a kind of a satsang. So maybe he left his body, but he's here. Anyone who reads, opens the book, he's there. So if you open the book, read the poem, he will come. But when I met him, I was 22. I don't know what happened, but I guess I was too much in the mind to really understand its value.
Well, it's all turned out okay. Yeah, you've translated 4 beautiful books, and you've organized them into a way that makes them fascinating and interesting to read and publishable and all. So it's all unfolding as it's meant to, I would say.
Yeah, everything at the right time.
Yeah. And this notion that he's here, with you, and he's here if one reads his book. I mean, I don't find that's not just a figure of speech. That sort of, I think things actually work that way. Many people have reported that sort of experience with Ramana. I mean, when these people drop the physical body, they don't necessarily dissolve like some drop into the ocean, never to have any sort of individual influence again. They still can play a role in the course of human events.
Yeah, with the photograph, or it's just the physical body. It's gone, but the person is. When Ramana was alive, or Ilie Cioara, when he was alive, he was not the body. So the body drops, it's just the body.
Yeah, he's
but
still not the body.
He's still the same.
Yep. Yeah.
I like this.
As Ilia put it in one of his books, the body's like a vehicle which has kind of outlived its usefulness or effectiveness, I think he said. It just reaches a point at which it's more of a burden than a help. And so you drop it.
Yeah.
Maybe you get a new one, maybe you don't.
It's like a car. It breaks down, you get a new one.
Yeah, at a certain point it's just becoming too expensive to repair it all the time. It makes more sense to get a newer one.
I like this story in Ramakrishna, where someone was worshipping a picture of Ramakrishna, and they asked him, why do you worship a picture? And he says, well, when the master was alive, there was his physical body, and now the picture is his physical body.
Mm.
I like the story.
Nice. So is there anything more you'd like to say about him that we haven't covered? I mean, there's so many, as I said in the beginning, I feel like these are books that I'll actually keep and continue to read the rest of my life, because there's a depth to them that you can appreciate more and more as your own depth improves. Yeah,
as your experience deepens, you find more and more.
Yeah.
I've reread. It's something you read. The Silence of the Mind, the first book, which I gave the most attention. Then it's like having the first child and then the second.
Yeah.
So I've reread that book many times, and parts of it I've reread hundreds of times, and it's like it's an experience. So it never gets old. It's not something like you read and then you know. It's something like you read and then 2 months later, when you read again, you find something new in it. It's like a mirror of your own experience.
Exactly. Very well said. Do you read it in the original Romanian, or do you read your own translation?
Both.
Both. Okay. Good.
I like to read it in Romanian as well. It's a different
flavor.
It's very. There's a rhythm. There's rhyme. Sometimes I find it annoying.
Yeah.
But yeah, both. I know.
Good.
But when I read the English version, I don't read it like I've wrote it. I don't feel that. I read like, okay, I've just discovered this book.
Yeah. You were just the pen. The pen doesn't write the book. The person writes the book and uses the pen to get.
The thing is that he describes his writing the same way. Mm-hmm. That he was a pen in the hand of God, or God of existence. So when he wrote the poems, he describes the same thing. He didn't say, "I wrote these poems." He said, "I'm just a pen.
Yep.
I just wrote." And that's why he's completely disinterested. Like, he wrote 300 poems in a year, and then he stopped. He felt like, okay, if you want me to write some more, I will.
Yeah, let me know. That's great. Alrighty. Well,
I think any mystic who writes does not feel that he's writing anything. So I think his view of what he wrote is the same. He was just
an instrument,
a pen,
right?
Yeah. And he has a poem where he says, "Use me, God, use me as much as you want, because I am your instrument."
Yeah,
something like this. I haven't translated that one.
Reminds me of the Saint Francis prayer. Make me an instrument of thy peace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Is there any particular poem that is your absolute favorite that you would like to leave us with? We could actually read it in closing this interview.
Yeah. I'll read it.
You could grab it fast and read it.
It's called I Am Boundlessness. I am boundlessness. I am spontaneous simplicity, mind, heart, and feeling, a whole being, absolute fullness, love in action. This state reveals itself naturally. When the mind is awakened, all becomes one. The past melts away in the light of all-encompassing attention. In emptiness, the sacred reveals itself in its natural brilliance. Experiencing the moment, the personal mind is dissipated, expanding into affinity as universal mind. Each such encounter transforms us radically, For in each spark of consciousness, we are newness, divinity, reality. I'll do another one. I feel generous. I'll do another one.
Sure.
It's called the... Okay. It's called The Power of Emptiness. The void or psychological emptiness is a strange phenomenon. It appears spontaneously in the pause between two thoughts. As the all thought ends its course and disappears, its end is the gate. Natural silence ensues. Persist in being with it as much as you can. The mind is completely silent. We are attentive, clear consciousness. All meanings, boundaries disappear. Us and the infinite are one. Practically, we have a new mind, always fresh. Being in the pause, I become infinite. It separates two worlds. I leave the limited world and enter boundlessness through total melting. The whole being is calm, a constant sparkle. There is no time, no space, just everlasting eternity. I move in direct contact with life, in a permanent present. I am pure energy, without motivations. The simplicity of existence integrates us completely. We really encounter life only through this now. Free from the old, we are able to embrace the new. All this beauty vanishes when another thought appears. It comes from the knowing mind, an old recording. Let it play its game, do not oppose any resistance. Encounter it as it is, without any purpose. It will certainly disappear, and emptiness ensues again, another opportunity to encounter it practically. We find the real meaning of life through this void. It is a boundary line between two worlds. On the one side, the limited, where the ego is the master. On the other, the infinite, where love is the master. Let this psychological emptiness be your guide in everything you encounter on your spiritual path. If it's not the starting point, we easily get deceived. Only through emptiness we become love.
Very nice. Those are great. So that gives people a taste of these poems, and then after each one, there's a prose discussion about the same theme. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there are 4 such books in print. I'll link to them all from my website. They're on Amazon. I presume people can buy them there. Yeah, so I'll link to them. And also you have a website, which I'll be linking to. So thank you. This has been a fascinating discussion. It's been great getting to meet you and getting to meet Ilia through you. I think it's wonderful work you're doing in the world, bringing him to everyone's attention. I think, perhaps the biggest impact of his life is yet to come in terms of, long-term influence that his writings will have. So that's great, and he is probably behind the scene, or smiling down upon you from on high, however we want to put it, and playing a hand in all this. So
he's working in other levels because he's
Yeah.
Like I said, there's nobody, but he's there, and he doesn't have any limits. So
Right.
he's working on various levels.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just me. I'm just like one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And perhaps the
And I
time
think
will...
everyone who reads the books will be able to feel his presence.
Mm-hmm. And when you leave this life, perhaps you'll get the opportunity to kiss his hand. Good. So thank you. Let me just make some concluding remarks.
I don't let this. It's like a merging.
Right.
It's like French. It's like I try to disappear in him. I don't want to get into this trip that I'm the guy who. I feel like is a friend. I feel like someone I've spent time with, and a friend, and someone I merge with, and someone who, through his energy, he's helping me expand.
Yeah.
My perception.
I think that's the right attitude. In fact, when you look at his books, you can hardly find your name in it. It's like some tiny little print in the beginning, translated, by Petrica Verdes. But otherwise, you're obviously not tooting your own horn here.
After I translate, then I correct, because my duty to give a correct, grammatically correct text. But then I forget. I read it as if it's not my.
It's fresh, right?
I read it as if it's just a book I'm reading. I don't think that I've written.
Right. Because ultimately you haven't.
In some way, just the pen.
Yeah, you are, exactly. You're just the pen. The pen of the pen. Okay, good. Shall we conclude?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So I've been speaking with Petrica Verdes, who is the translator for Ilie Cioara's books, and I'll be linking to his website as well as to the books from batgap.com, and there you can see all of the other interviews that have been done so far. And you can also sign up to be notified whenever a new one is done. There's a tab there for this email notification. There's also a discussion group there on Batgap that crops up around each interview, so feel free to participate in that if you wish, and sometimes gets quite lively. There's also an audio podcast of this show if you don't like to just sit in front of your computer and watch interviews, if you'd rather hike in the woods or something while you listen to them. So you'll see that link, and you can sign up, get it on your iPod. There's a donate button, which I appreciate people clicking if they feel able to do so. And I think that's about it. So thank you, Petrica. And thanks to those who've been listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.